What do you think of when I say Arch Linux? The endless reputation and stereotypes? The arguably difficult installation process? The allegedly toxic and elitist community? Or the multitude of themes people have made whilst using Arch Linux? There are many urban legends about this operating system, so today I am going to tell you about the OS that I have been using for many years, and of course to a large extent still use. I'm going to tell you if this is a good endgame operating system, how it compares to NixOS, and if I personally have decided to stop using Arch in favor of Nix. Furthermore, I am going to rate the operating system in these categories, both in a biased way and an unbiased way. But first, I am going to tell you about some theory. Judd Vinay first introduced Arch Linux year 2002. Unlike other Linux distributions at the time, Arch was a minimalist distro. It doesn't provide you with a desktop environment, it doesn't handle the installation for you, and it doesn't provide a point-and-click experience like any of the other distros at the time. Furthermore, it doesn't come pre-installed with any software. It is a blank slate of an operating system, and you have to handle everything yourself. Arch Linux being this minimalist means that from the start of the installation process to the finished installation, all you will really be able to look at is a terminal interface. No point-and-click user interface, no pre-installed software, no desktop environment, nothing. All you have is a terminal, both before you've installed the system and after you've installed the system. This is Arch Linux. This makes Arch Linux a clean slate from which you can install and configure your operating system from essentially scratch. You can choose your own display manager, your own desktop environment, and you can install all of the software that could be considered bloat from the beginning according to your preference. You install your own drivers, you choose whether you want them to be free or non-free. You install and you configure everything by yourself. This is what gives Arch Linux its reputation as an advanced and highly customizable operating system, a reputation I think it is rightfully given. Speaking of installing everything yourself, Arch Linux uses the Pacman package manager. This is what you're going to use to install packages and software. It is a pretty easy to use package manager. Furthermore, it's also the tool you're going to use to update your operating system, which by the way follows a rolling release cycle. This requires more responsibility compared to operating systems that follow a static release cycle, such as Mint, for example. Along with the officially maintained packages provided by the default mirror list, which Pacman uses, there's a community maintained repository of packages in a place called the Arch User Repository, or the R. It's less official and less verified, since anyone can create and maintain their own package to pretty much any software. These two together essentially create an ecosystem of packages and software that you can install on Arch, and they're quite extensive. I have yet to find any package and any software that doesn't exist on either of these two. But with user-maintained anything, you want to be more careful, of course. Technically, using the R and Arch User Repository has a couple steps to install software, which is why there's external tools such as Yay or Paru, which make it easier to use the Arch User Repository. When using Arch, it's good to, of course, use the default package manager and also use something like Yay. This makes installing packages and updating them very simple. But once again, be careful when you use something that's from the Arch User Repository. Verify it, and before you update, verify the update. Not doing this can cause some trouble, and when using Arch, verifying is something that you want to do. You need to be more responsible. Still, even with the R, even with Pacman, no user interface. Everything here is handled through the terminal. Now, with the theory of Arch Linux done, I think it's time to move over to Arch Linux in practice. The Arch Linux website immediately is the antithesis of easy to use. No fancy user interface, no easy to understand headings. No, it is simply just a collection of data, clearly unlike other operating system websites such as MintOS or PopOS. To install, you simply go to the download page, which isn't hard to find at all. You install the ISO, either via mirror or a torrent, which you will burn onto a USB stick. This can be done with various tools, or if you're using Arch Linux, you can use the dd command my beloved. After you have the USB drive containing the ISO of Arch Linux, You would plug it into a computer, boot from the USB stick, and observe Arch Linux pre the installation process. All you get is a terminal. It's here where the entire meme of Arch Linux being difficult to install starts, and where people may feel gate-kept from using the operating system. But the truth is, of course, all you have to do to install Arch Linux is follow the wiki. The Arch installation guide is very concise, it's made in a stepwise fashion, and all you have to do is follow it to install the operating system. It isn't difficult at all. It does simply take some time. And in a way, I consider this long-winded installation process of Arch Linux to be a feature because it makes you learn about your operating system. It teaches you about the OS, it walks you through everything that you install, and it makes you aware of how the OS is set up. You're basically a surgeon dissecting a human being, studying the organs and learning how everything works. Except instead of a human being, it's a computer, of course. It is a very scientific way of setting up an operating system, and it teaches you a lot. Furthermore, starting from year 2021, they started providing an installation script to Arch Linux. It's called Arch Install. You simply run the script and it walks you through the installation process. And it is still not a point-and-click user interface, but it's very easy to use. Some people have reported having issues and bugs with it. I haven't had any, but it's something to keep in mind. It's not entirely stable, although more often than not, it tends to just work. I'm here to tell you that it is fine to use the Arch install script. Do not listen to the elitists that tell you that it's cheating. It's not. That's a stupid concept. It's an operating system. After you've installed the operating system, it's time to flaunt it by neo-fetching it and taking a screenshot. Only after you've done that is the time to set up the operating system and do the rest of the installation, such as installing a desktop. So now that Arch Linux is installed on your computer, do you wish to set up a DE such as GNOME, Cinnamon, or Plasma? Or will you go the full customization and minimalist route and set up a tiling window manager such as Hyperland or Sway or BSPWM? The possibilities are endless here. I, on my computer, chose to install the Hyperland tiling window manager. Along with that, I installed NeoVim because this is Arch Linux. You have to use NeoVim to edit your configuration files. Furthermore, I installed the LY display manager in order to more easily boot into Hyperland. I installed the Kitty terminal, Quick Shell since I wanted to use my retro theme. I installed Steam and Wine, and I installed some drivers and all of that stuff. Nothing comes pre-installed. And after booting into Hyperland, well, the story doesn't end here. You have to customize your operating system. I had to edit the configuration files to match my display monitor resolution. I had to install any drivers. I had to fix any bugs that come up, which usually is a few, and furthermore, they tend to be quite unique. This is how you probably are going to start with Arch Linux. You're going to have to troubleshoot things, you're going to have to learn about a lot of things, you're going to have to browse the wiki, and it truly is an operating system where you need to study. Not as much as NixOS, because it is way more simple and plain, but nonetheless, going from an operating system such as Mint or Pop! OS or Windows or Mac OS, Arch Linux is more advanced. Now, to be completely honest, most people are not going to want to edit configuration files with a text editor whilst fixing bugs and pondering the terminal for many, many hours. This simply isn't a thing most people want to do. Arch Linux is not for most people. Now, of course, you can set it up to have a very easy-to-use user interface, but once again, you have to set it up. And you still need to learn about Pac-Man and this terminal-centric way of navigating the OS and installing software. If you're a programmer or you do scripting on the side, you're already going to feel a lot more comfortable with Arch Linux. And if you're foreign to programming or scripting, or at the very least editing config files, well, using Arch Linux is probably going to force you to learn these things, which isn't a bad thing, but it's good to have that kind of knowledge beforehand. And conveniently, this project has a sponsor, and like before, it is Brilliant. Brilliant is an educational service where you can learn mathematics, science, and programming. And it does so without being boring or arduous at all. If you're learning programming, for instance, it's a perfect tool to add to your collection by doing these interactive and fun tasks on the side. Brilliant can be installed on your mobile device, and you can start learning for free. I personally use Brilliant to improve my knowledge in mathematics. so I can recommend it as an additional tool to be added to your learning process. Furthermore, you can scan this QR code or use my link in order to start learning for free, and also get a 20% discount on the annual subscription, which is quite significant. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this project. It really helps making it possible, considering all of the intricacies of my editing language. It takes time. And thanks to you for sticking so far. If you're interested in Brilliant, do go ahead and try it. Knowledge and learning is only a good thing. So, assuming that you've expanded your brain and become more familiar with editing config files and utilizing the terminal, you can now start using Arch Linux to its maximum potential. And it's here where you're either going to love the operating system or hate it. And of course, if you didn't take this plunge of learning all of these topics, you're just gonna hate Arch Linux. You're gonna think, this is not for me. It's something that takes patience and sustained effort. However, once you're done and once you've become used to Arch, it is really rewarding and it actually becomes quite fun. What you get is a clean slate, a blank canvas upon which you can design an operating system that matches your preferences almost perfectly at the cost of time and effort, and sometimes bugs that you have to fix. Now, I previously reviewed NixOS. Now's a good time to compare these two because when people talk about endgame OSs that are advanced and customizable, these two are usually the ones most people tend to recommend or talk about. NixOS, it is more complicated, it's more advanced, it is more opinionated, it has bespoke features and a very unique way of handling things in general with the configuration files and the Nix language. These are all a prerequisite that you have to learn, along with being able to utilize the terminal and edit config files, which really is the core of Arch Linux. In return, NixOS will provide you with features. For instance, whenever you install a software on NixOS, it actually rebuilds the entire operating system and adds it to the list of OSs you can boot from. If the installation breaks your OS, you can just use an older build, which means you can always be sure that you can boot into an operating system, even though you messed something up in the config files. In Arch Linux, you might update something or install something, it breaks your system, and you're essentially fucked. You need to fix the entire operating system by using more tedious and arduous methods that I will not really mention here. But of course, Nix does force you to learn a lot more things. And whereas you can get by using Arch if you learn some basic scripting or editing config files and utilizing the terminal, you have to learn all of that with Nix along with a relatively complicated programming language. Furthermore, NixOS does provide nice features, but it by no means does it in a very good way. Conceptually, Nix is very good. Practically, they could have executed some of the features better. If you're curious about that, again, I suggest looking at that review. Simply put, Nix is a bigger pill to swallow, but it provides you also with more features in return. But some people value minimalism and a more bare bones OS where you have more control and you handle everything yourself. And for those people, Arch Linux is probably going to be better because Arch isn't nearly as opinionated as NixOS is. When deciding on an endgame distro to use, these are the two wolves that you have. Which one you will like more depends on your personal preferences, of course. I like both and I use both. And I've used Arch Linux for about 5 years now, so throughout my extensive use and troubleshooting and studying the operating system, I've learned a lot. And now it is time to talk about specific topics, whereas Arch Linux is concerned. These topics, and I'm also going to rate how well the OS performs in the topics in a biased and unbiased way. After you've installed the operating system either by following the wiki or simply using Arch install, and after you've configured your entire operating system with a DE or tiling window manager and set everything up and installed all of the drivers, you can finally install Steam and then download some games, provided no bugs occurred. And if they did, you would of course have to debug them and fix them. If a game doesn't natively support Linux, you must enable Proton, and then in most cases, the game will simply work. The entire process I've described, it isn't perfect, but it's something that you get used to quite quickly, to be honest. It's good to have patience, and with Arch, of course, you need more patience compared to other distros or Windows, for example. Furthermore, with gaming and in the future topics, there's always the asterisk of before you do any of that stuff, you have to learn the operating system and you have to set it up all from a bare bones terminal with no software. It's quite a big asterisk, which by default will make me subtract some of the points that I would give it otherwise, since it can take time and it can be a pain to learn. Of course, if you're more savvy or if you've taken the time to learn, which requires patience, it really doesn't become a hindrance anymore. Gaming works flawlessly. Everything I like to play works well, and whenever I've encountered issues, which has happened, I've been able to fix it relatively quickly. There's usually always someone online that's posted their solutions. The only exception is when some games use kernel-level anti-cheats, which don't really exist on Linux, luckily. For gaming, I've chosen to rate Arch Linux a 3 out of 5. Slightly better than I gave NixOS, because on Arch, the asterisk of having to learn the operating system and set things up is slightly less tedious than NixOS. Learning how to use Arch and learning how to set up Arch is easier than learning how to set up Nix, which brings us to the next chapter. Much like with gaming, the asterisk of having to learn the operating system and set things up still exists with productivity. Simply put, if you've managed to transpose your workflow to utilizing softwares that predominantly work well with Linux, you can be very productive with Arch Linux. Nothing stops you. Of course, productivity software tend to be more complicated, more advanced. You might face more bugs here. And for productivity, there are a lot of apps that are exclusive to Windows, but a lot of them do still work on Linux. It just kind of becomes a hassle to set them up. Many times they also run more poorly in terms of performance. I've programmed on Arch, made lots of 2D and 3D artwork, made music and lots of sound design related things, made games. I've edited a lot with Arch, and I've been able to do all of those things in a manner where I remain very productive. I have faced issues where I have had to fix software, whether it's an update breaking something or in general a software that tends to have more bugs with Linux or perhaps require more customization. These are issues that exist, but I've been able to overcome them with some time and effort. And once you learn about how to solve the problem, you kind of just add that to the collection of things you know about the OS and the software in question. This might not be something that you want to deal with, which is fine, but for me, I don't mind it. The pros of using Arch and having that kind of operating system to me outweigh the cons of having to spend more time setting things up. I simply have a lot of patience. For music production, you can use tools that can essentially port Windows-only VST plugins to Linux, and they work well in my experience. Some of them don't work very well, but it really isn't a problem to find alternatives. You can use native DAWs such as Reaper or Bitwig Studio, or you can also run FL Studio or Ableton Live through Wine. I've seen people do it with quite a lot of success, but wherever you can, I recommend using native. It's always going to be better. Honestly, programming and scripting and creating things, it's really nice using Arch for this. Because it's so customizable, you can customize it to work perfectly with your programming workflow. Because you use Arch, you might as well take the plunge and install NeoVim. So learning NeoVim and customizing that and programming, it's just a very nice experience. Using tiling window managers means you can make the most out of your screen space. You can even have 2 projects open at once and a terminal, and everything just fits nicely and works very well. Using Arch Linux and programming, it honestly feels like you can be more productive. Having such a clean slate in general, I think, is a boon for coders, because I think you're naturally the kind of person that would want to customize everything since you're more technically inclined. And you'll of course learn all about Arch Linux, and learning how to use Linux is good if your main line of work is programming. So if you do code, I do recommend at least trying out Arch. It's really a good experience. Artwork software such as Blender or Krita work very well. I would rate Arch at a 2.5 out of 5. In other words, slightly higher than NixOS. Once again, because the asterisk of having to learn and use the operating system is slightly more palatable with Arch Linux. For many, the bread and butter of Arch Linux discourse is the community. There's the memetics on one hand, the conflicting urban legends of the type of person that would use Arch Linux. And before you ask, I was like this before I started using the operating system. So there's the allegedly toxic and elitist forums, and of course plenty of drama related with the operating system. Now, of course, this has no bearing on the development of the operating system itself, which has gone quite smoothly over the years. Some minor hiccups occur, but usually those are community-oriented. Now, a lot of people tend to gossip and point fingers regarding communities and forums of different operating systems. I personally don't care. As long as the OS is good, has a healthy base of maintainers and contributors, I will use it. I don't care about the community that much. If the OS is evolving, who cares, right? This is especially relevant because there's been some OS-related drama, but I kind of think that's just kind of lame. We're talking about an operating system here. It's supposed to be something technical. But yes, it is important for a community to be helpful and welcoming, and also not tarnish the reputation of the OS, because that could lead to less people trying it out and using it, which leads to maintainers and contributors finding a smaller incentive to contribute to the OS. That being said, I don't think that will ever happen with Arch Linux because it's essentially become a cornerstone of the Linux ecosystem. It's reached the point where other operating systems are based on Arch Linux, such as SteamOS or Endeavour. It's such a core component of the ecosystem that it's essentially become quite robust compared to Nix, for example, which does go through some growing pains because of its, let's call it, unique nature. The Arch Linux community is something I like. People are usually very helpful. Whenever there's a bug, you can ask, and usually someone will be able to point you towards a solution. The Arch Linux wiki is probably one of the best. It's up to date, it's accurate, and it usually doesn't result in any problems. 4.7 out of 5. I think it's very good. And the wiki is very good, so really don't have anything to complain about. Then we have popularity. I'm gonna keep this short because it kind of overlaps with community. Like I mentioned, Arch Linux is very popular. If you learn about Linux, you will learn about Arch because it's such a cornerstone of the ecosystem. Popularity is a 5 out of 5. It is one of the most popular Linux distros in the world. That concludes the rating of the operating system, at least in terms of the unbiased ratings. Let's discuss the ratings in more detail and talk about the general verdict. Now, the attempt at making an unbiased rating resulted in these points. If you compare them to the unbiased ratings of NixOS, they look like this. And because different people prioritize different things, and some people don't mind the difficulty and some people prefer it, using my biased ratings, the respective OSs look like this. And of course, because everyone is unique, everyone has their own preferences, these points don't really mean that much, which again is why this isn't just a 10-second image of a video where I show you the points. No, it's quite long and it goes into detail. In the end, I've provided information and I hope that you will make your own mind. Furthermore, I recommend installing a virtual machine and using the OS there so you don't have to permanently commit. Or if you have a computer such as this, you can use that to test out the OS. I haven't permanently switched to Nix and I haven't permanently decided, you know what, I'm gonna use Arch. Like I mentioned, I use both operating systems. For now, on my main computer, I use NixOS because I really value the reproducibility aspect. It being more stable with a rebuild system is very nice. And I like to have something I could roll back to easily. So anyhow, points aside, I really love Arch Linux. I know it's not a surprise. It is a nice, minimalist distro with no bloat at all, and it's a clean slate from which you can customize anything yourself. Whenever I make a new Linux theme, which I do quite a lot, I tend to use Arch Linux. Arch is very nice. Pacman is very nice. The Arch user repository is very legendary. I like the community and the discourse. It's entertaining. It is usually quite fun to discuss Arch Linux, even in a non-technical or technological aspect, because it has such a vibrant reputation, to put it lightly. All this being said and done, Arch Linux is a very hard to use operating system, and I found it somewhat time-consuming to install and learn the Arch way of doing things, which usually just means setting things up yourself. And I'm a programmer, so I have that kind of comfort with terminals and config files and stuff like that, which isn't something most people have, so you wouldn't recommend Arch Linux for the average person at all. But of course, if you're curious, nothing stops you from having a virtual machine or a cheap laptop where you can install Arch Linux and follow the installation guide to install the OS and test things. I recommend trying it out, it doesn't hurt. So, much like Nix, an advanced operating system, maybe it's time to discuss something more befitting for the masses, don't you think?